In Las Vegas, under the blinding lights of the MGM Grand, a Hollywood action star was about to test the limits of his bravado. What should have been a routine celebrity appearance turned deadly serious when Jason Statham mocked a living legend, dismissing Chuck Norris as too old to fight. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical guest in the spotlight. For generations, he was the undefeated champion, the martial artist who forged his own style, and the warrior whose discipline became legend across continents. When Statham seized the microphone and challenged him in front of thousands, he had no idea he was provoking a master who didn't fight for ego, but for principle. Chuck's calm, precise response would trigger a moment that humbled Hollywood and electrified the fight world. What began as bravado and mockery would become a test of respect and endurance. The MGM Grand would never be remembered for its scheduled fights that night. But for the moment, a legend showed the world that mastery ages, but it never fades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas thrummed with energy. Light beams sliced through artificial fog, creating ethereal pathways across the packed stands. 9,000 fans buzzed in anticipation, their combined voices creating a constant rumble that seemed to vibrate the very walls. Fight night in Vegas, there was nothing quite like it. Behind the scenes, in the labyrinthine corridors of the venue, Jason Statham moved with easy confidence. Fresh off the promotional circuit for his latest action blockbuster, he'd been invited as a celebrity guest for tonight's exhibition matches. He wore his fame like a well-tailored jacket, comfortable, imposing, designed to be noticed. "Mr. Statham! Over here!" A cluster of reporters with press badges dangling from lanyards waved microphones and cameras in his direction. Jason flashed his trademark half-smile and approached, hands casually tucked into the pockets of his designer slacks. "Just one question about tonight's exhibition," called out a woman with sharp eyes and a CNN microphone. "What do you think about Chuck Norris being announced as the special guest referee for the main event?" Jason's eyebrows lifted slightly, the smile tightening at the corners. He hadn't known that. Not that it mattered. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial level that somehow carried perfectly to every ear in the vicinity. "Chuck Norris? Seriously?" He chuckled, the sound both amused and dismissive. "I mean, respect to the man for what he did in his prime, but come on. That was what, 40 years ago? He's got to be pushing 80 now. Too old to even be in the ring, much less officiate a proper fight." The reporters went still for a half-second before erupting in follow-up questions. Jason continued, warming to his theme. "Look, I'm not saying the man wasn't a legend in his time. But this is 2025. The game's evolved. These fighters today would run circles around what passed for martial arts back then." He gestured vaguely toward the arena. "It's like comparing a flip phone to the latest quantum processor smartphone, isn't it? But Chuck Norris is still considered one of the founding fathers of modern MMA, pressed another reporter. "Six-time world karate champion, trained Bruce Lee." "And I respect the history," Jason cut in smoothly. "But let's be honest, these days, he's more meme than man. When was the last time anyone saw him throw a real punch instead of acting in those cowboy shows?" Camera flashes popped like lightning around him. Jason knew his words would be online within minutes. But he wasn't concerned. Controversy kept your name relevant in this business. A young production assistant nervously approached the edge of the media scrum. "Mr. Statham, they need you ringside in 5 minutes." Right then, Jason straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "Duty calls." As he moved away, the reporters immediately bent to their phones, fingers flying across screens. The whispers began spreading through the backstage area like wildfire. jumping from crew member to security personnel to fight officials. Jason Statham had just called Chuck Norris too old to fight. In the green room reserved for the event's special guests, a veteran promoter named Ray Mendoza watched the commotion through the open door. With growing concern, he turned to his assistant. "Did you hear what Statham just said about Chuck?" The assistant nodded, eyes wide. "It's already trending." "Jesus." Ray rubbed his temple. "Is Chuck here yet?" "Arrived 10 minutes ago. He's in the private lounge." Ray hesitated, glancing at his watch. The program was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. "Should we tell him?" The assistant gave him a look. "You think he won't hear it anyway?" The whole arena is buzzing. Out in the main hall, the energy had noticeably shifted. As Jason made his way to his front row seat, escorted by security, murmurs followed in his wake. Phones appeared in hands throughout the stands. People hunching over screens, then looking up to whisper to their neighbors. On the massive screens suspended above the octagon, the event's countdown timer showed 15 minutes until the first bout. The official commentators, seated at their elevated desk with headsets and monitors, were already discussing the developing situation. "And if you're just joining us, we're getting reports of some unexpected pre-show drama," said Dave Cahill, the lead commentator. "It seems our celebrity guest Jason Statham has made some rather pointed comments about tonight's special guest referee, the legendary Chuck Norris." His co-commentator, former UFC champion Raquel Torres, leaned forward. "I'm seeing the quotes coming through now. And wow, calling Chuck Norris too old to fight is a bold move, even for an action star. Especially when you consider Norris's actual record," Dave added. 6 consecutive world championships, developing his own martial art of Chun Kuk Do, training numerous champions over decades. "And let's not forget," Raquel cut in, "Chuck Norris is in phenomenal shape for a man in his 80s. I trained with him 3 years ago for a charity event, and trust me, the man can still move." The camera feed switched to a wide shot of the arena, zooming in on Jason taking his seat in the front row. He seemed perfectly at ease, nodding to fans who recognized him, signing a program someone thrust toward him. If he was aware of the storm he'd just created, he showed no sign of it. The crowd was dividing in real time. From one section came a chant, "Statham! Statham!" Immediately, another section responded with, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Security personnel exchanged glances, moving to position themselves near the more vocal sections. In the center of the arena stood the octagon, 8 sides of unforgiving chain link enclosing the canvas where tonight's battles would be fought. The lights gleamed off its surface, making it look almost ceremonial, like an ancient temple awaiting its sacrifice. Backstage, Ray Mendoza stood outside the private lounge, hand raised to knock, then hesitating. The door opened before his knuckles made contact. Chuck Norris stood in the doorway, dressed in simple black pants and a fitted black button-down shirt. Despite being in his 80s, his posture remained perfectly upright, his movements fluid. His legendary beard, now white but impeccably trimmed, framed a face that seemed to have settled into permanent calm decades ago. "I heard," he said simply. Voice low and even. Ray blinked. I mean, I was just coming to—" "It's fine, Ray." Chuck stepped past him into the corridor. "The program's starting soon, right?" "Yes. But do you want to release a statement or something? People are talking." Chuck's eyes, still sharp despite the years, met Ray's for a brief moment. There was no anger there, no offense taken. Just a quiet amusement that made Ray suddenly feel like he was missing the joke. "No statement needed," Chuck said. He began walking toward the arena entrance, moving with the same measured confidence he'd always possessed. Actions speak louder than words. Ray hurried to catch up. So you're still officiating the main event? Chuck nodded once. And you're not upset about what Statham said? The corner of Chuck's mouth curved slightly. Why would I be? As they approached the corridor leading to the arena floor, the noise from the crowd swelled like an incoming tide. The screens overhead showed the countdown timer. 5 minutes to showtime. Camera crews scrambled to their positions. Chuck paused at the edge of the entrance tunnel, just out of sight of the main arena. From here, he could see the packed stands, the glowing octagon, and directly across from his position Jason Statham, in the front row, laughing at something someone had said to him. You know, Chuck said quietly, more to himself than to Ray, there's a difference between fighters and warriors. What's that? Ray asked. Chuck's eyes remained fixed on the arena as he answered. Fighters seek attention. Warriors command respect. He stepped forward into the light, ready to let his actions speak for him. The pre-show music pounded through the arena speakers, a pulsing beat that seemed to synchronize with the crowd's collective heartbeat. The first exhibition match was minutes away, but all eyes had shifted to the tunnel entrance where Chuck Norris now stood. There was no theatrical entrance, no special lighting or announcement, just the sudden presence of a legend. Chuck walked forward with measured steps, his gait as steady as it had been decades ago when he dominated the martial arts world. The only concession to age was a certain deliberateness to his movements, a precision that came from years of discipline rather than physical limitation. The first fans to spot him fell silent in mid-conversation, their attention magnetically drawn to his presence. The silence spread outward like ripples in a pond, section by section, falling quiet until the music seemed unnaturally loud against the human stillness. Then came the whispers, rushing through the crowd like wind through a wheat field. It's him. Chuck Norris. He's here. Cameras swiveled, capturing his approach on the massive overhead screens. A low rumble began building from the back of the arena, swelling forward until it erupted into a thunderous chant. Chuck! 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 Security personnel lining the walkway stood straighter as he passed, some nodding in respect. One young guard, no more than 25, actually stepped back and saluted, a spontaneous gesture that made those around him smile. In the VIP section, conversation died as heads turned toward the approaching figure. Several well-known fighters seated there stood up, applauding without self-consciousness. Among them was Mateo Rodriguez, the current middleweight champion, who watched Chuck with unmasked admiration. Man, I had posters of him on my wall when I was a kid, Mateo murmured to his trainer beside him. Still got his book on mental discipline in my gym bag. Chuck acknowledged the fighters with a slight nod but kept moving, his path taking him along the edge of the octagon. The overhead screens now split to show both Chuck's progress and, in a smaller window, Jason Statham's reaction from his front row seat. Jason had been in mid-laugh when the crowd's energy shifted. He turned to see what had captured everyone's attention, his smile freezing momentarily when he spotted Chuck. To his credit, he recovered quickly, leaning back in his seat with exaggerated casualness. The camera caught his whispered comment to his companion. Speak of the devil. Chuck's circuit brought him directly opposite Jason's seat. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance. Neither man's expression changed. Chuck's remained composed. Jason's deliberately amused, but something electric passed between them that the entire arena could feel. The commentators picked up on it immediately. And there it is, folks, Dave Cahill said, his voice carrying through the speakers. The first visual contact between Chuck Norris and Jason Statham since those controversial comments backstage. Interesting body language from both men, Raquel Torres added. Statham projecting confidence, but notice how he's the first to break eye contact? Meanwhile, Chuck hasn't changed his expression once since entering. The exchange lasted only seconds before Chuck continued his walk, but it was enough to send the crowd into a frenzy. The dueling chants resumed with increased fervor. Chuck! Chuck! Battling against Statham! Statham! As Chuck reached the officials' area, the event director approached him with visible concern. Mr. Norris, we've prepared a statement if you'd like to address the situation before the matches begin, he said, offering a tablet with prepared text. Chuck glanced at it briefly, then handed it back with a small shake of his head. Not necessary. But the comments were just words. Chuck's voice remained even. I'm here to referee a fight, not start one. The director hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. As you wish. We're honored to have you regardless. Across the arena, Jason was making a show of being unfazed. He signed autographs for nearby fans, posed for selfies, and laughed loudly with his entourage. But those closest to him noticed how his eyes kept drifting toward Chuck, tracking his movements. Dude's not even responding, Jason muttered to his manager beside him. Not even a little riled up. His manager leaned in. Maybe he didn't hear what you said? Jason snorted. Everyone heard it. It's all over social media already. Then maybe he's just being professional. Or maybe he knows I'm right. Jason raised his voice slightly, ensuring those around him could hear. I mean, look at him moving like he's afraid something might break. The fan beside Jason, who had just asked for an autograph, suddenly withdrew his program. Man, that's Chuck Norris you're talking about. Show some respect. Jason's smile tightened, but he shrugged it off. Just stating facts. No disrespect intended. In the center of the arena, the announcer had taken his position inside the octagon, microphone in hand. The house lights dimmed except for the spotlights on the cage. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed through the speakers. Welcome to tonight's special exhibition matches, featuring some of the greatest talent in mixed martial arts today. The crowd roared its approval, momentarily united again in anticipation of the fights. Before we begin our first match, please welcome our special guest referee for tonight's main event. A man who needs no introduction. A true legend of martial arts. An undefeated six-time world champion. The spotlight swung to where Chuck stood, illuminating him in brilliant white light. Chuck Norris! The arena erupted. Even those who had been chanting for Jason moments before couldn't help but applaud. There was something about seeing a living legend in person that transcended temporary allegiances. Chuck acknowledged the ovation with a simple raised hand, then moved to take his seat near the officials' table. No speech, no showboating, just quiet acknowledgement. The contrast was stark and immediately noticeable. Where Jason projected his presence outward, demanding attention, Chuck simply existed in his space, with such certainty that attention naturally flowed to him. Young fighters scattered throughout the crowd watched with particular intensity. Many had grown up on stories of Chuck's discipline and technique, his transition from champion to actor to cultural icon. They saw in him something that transcended the flash and spectacle of modern combat sports, a reminder that, beneath the entertainment, lay an art form built on respect and mastery. The first match began, two welterweights circling each other cautiously. But despite the action in the cage, the real tension remained between the front row and the officials' table. Midway through the second round, Jason leaned forward, watching Chuck more than the fighters. You know what? He said to his manager, voice carrying to those nearby. I bet I could take him. Even now. His manager choked on his drink. Are you insane? I'm serious. I've been training with the best fighters in the world for my films. Real training, not just choreography. Jason's eyes narrowed, calculating. He's got to be what? 80? 5? I'm in my prime. Jason, the man's a legend. This isn't about age. It's exactly about age, Jason insisted. Everyone's treating him like he's still the same fighter he was in the 70s. It's delusional. A few rows back, Mateo Rodriguez had moved seats to get a better view of the fight. He overheard Jason's comments and frowned. "You really don't get it, do you?" he called out, drawing surprised looks from those around him. "It's not about who would win a fight right now. It's about respect for what he represents." Jason turned, one eyebrow raised. "And what's that? Living on past glory?" Mateo's expression hardened. "Legacy. Discipline. Building something that lasts beyond physical prime, something you might want to think about." "I'll worry about legacy when I'm his age," Jason replied with a dismissive wave. "Right now, I'm more concerned with reality." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The exchange was captured by nearby phones, clips instantly spreading across social media platforms. The event's official feed picked it up. Commentators discussing the escalating tension. This is developing into something more than just casual trash talk, Dave Cahill observed. Statham seems determined to make a point here. And he's picking a dangerous target, Raquel Torres added. Chuck Norris might be in his 80s, but he's still Chuck Norris. There's a reason his reputation has endured for half a century. Between matches, production assistants huddled with the event director, discussing the developing situation. One pointed urgently at a tablet showing social media metrics. "This is blowing up," she said. "The hashtag Chuck v. Statham is trending worldwide. People are betting on whether there'll be a confrontation." The director ran a hand through his hair. "This wasn't planned. We can't just set up an impromptu fight between a legend and an actor." "Maybe we don't have to," another assistant suggested. "The tension is selling itself. Just keep the cameras on both of them." As the second match concluded, the production team implemented their new strategy. The arena screens began showing more frequent cuts between Chuck and Jason, highlighting their contrasting demeanors. Chuck remained focused on the technical aspects of each fight, occasionally making notes on a small pad. Jason became increasingly animated, gesturing as he discussed the matches with those around him, aware of the cameras tracking him. The crowd, picking up on the narrative being constructed, began to take sides more vocally. Signs appeared, hastily made from programs. Age before beauty. On one side, new school rules. On the other, what had started as an offhand comment was evolving into an ideological divide. Security teams repositioned themselves, communicating through earpieces. No one expected actual trouble, but the energy in the building had shifted from anticipatory to expectant. Something was coming, everyone could feel it. In the tunnel leading to the locker rooms, Ray Mendoza watched the monitors with growing apprehension. He'd been in the fight business long enough to recognize when a situation was building toward a flashpoint. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered to his assistant. "Chuck didn't sign up for this circus. Should we suggest he leave? Let someone else referee the main event?" Ray snorted. "You want to be the one to tell Chuck Norris to back down from anything? Be my guest." As the third match began, Chuck stood and made his way toward the backstage area, presumably for a scheduled break before the main event. His path would take him directly past Jason's seat. The cameras tracked his movement. Conversations died down as he approached the front row. Jason, suddenly aware of Chuck's proximity, straightened in his seat. Their second face-to-face encounter seemed inevitable. Chuck moved with the same measured pace, neither hurrying nor hesitating. As he drew level with Jason's position, he paused, turning slightly. The arena went silent, 9,000 people collectively holding their breath. Jason looked up, meeting Chuck's gaze directly. His expression was challenging, one corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smirk. "Something on your mind?" he asked, voice pitched to carry. Chuck regarded him for a long moment, his expression revealing nothing. Then, with the slightest movement, almost imperceptible to those watching, he simply raised one eyebrow. The gesture contained multitudes: amusement, assessment, and something older and deeper, the look of a man who had nothing to prove and knew it. Without a word, Chuck continued walking, disappearing into the tunnel. The crowd exhaled collectively, then erupted in a mixture of cheers, laughter, and renewed chants. The non-confrontation had somehow carried more weight than any exchange of words could have. Jason remained in his seat, the smirk frozen on his face. But those closest to him noticed how his fingers tightened on the armrest, knuckles whitening briefly before he forced himself to relax. "Did he just?" his manager began. "Dismiss me completely?" Jason finished, voice tight. "Yeah, he did." In the commentator's booth, Raquel Torres leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Now that," she said, "was a master class in psychological warfare." Chuck Norris just won that exchange without saying a single word. Dave nodded in agreement. The question is, what happens next? Because Jason Statham doesn't strike me as someone who takes being dismissed lightly. On the main screen, the camera lingered on Jason's face, capturing the exact moment when determination hardened in his eyes. The storm was building, and everyone knew that calm waters often preceded the most violent tempests. The crowd's energy had shifted yet again by the time the third match ended. What had begun as anticipation for the scheduled fights had evolved into something more primal, the collective sensing of an unplanned confrontation brewing beneath the official program. Phones remained raised throughout the arena, not just recording the matches but tracking the invisible thread of tension stretching between Jason Statham and Chuck Norris. In the temporary respite between bouts, the volume of conversation rose as theories and predictions flew across the stands. "No way Statham actually challenges him," a middle-aged fan in a vintage karate gi insisted to those around him. "He's an actor, not a fighter. It would be suicide." "But that's exactly why he might," argued a younger woman in designer athletic wear. "His whole brand is built on being the tough guy who backs down from nothing. If he lets this go, how's that look?" Near the fighter preparation area, a cluster of young MMA prospects huddled together, watching the proceedings with professional interest. Among them was Diego Reyes, an undefeated lightweight, considered the sport's next breakout star. "This is like watching different eras collide," he murmured to his training partners. "Old school versus new school in real time." "Who would you put money on?" one of them asked. Diego shook his head. "That's the wrong question. The real battle isn't about who's physically stronger right now, it's about whose approach to fighting, to life even, holds more truth." "Deep, bro," another fighter teased, but his expression remained thoughtful. On the screens overhead, the countdown to the main event had begun. 20 minutes remained, during which the organizers had planned a brief ceremony, honoring several pioneer fighters in attendance. The production team scrambled to adjust, knowing that the unexpected Chuck Jason narrative had captured the audience's attention far more effectively than any planned segment. Backstage, Chuck sat alone in the officials' lounge, eyes closed in what appeared to be meditation. Ray Mendoza hovered nearby, unsure whether to brief him on the escalating situation. "The directors are asking if you want security when you go back out there," Ray finally ventured. Chuck opened his eyes, the calmness in them making Ray's concern suddenly seem excessive. Why would I need security, Ray? Because Statham's been getting more worked up, not less. The guys monitoring social media say he's being egged on pretty hard by his fans. And you think he'll do something unwise? It wasn't a question. But Ray nodded anyway. His reputation's on the line now. He backed himself into a corner with those comments. Chuck rose smoothly from his chair, stretching his shoulders with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades learning the exact capabilities and limits of his body. A man creates his own corners, Ray, and his own ways out of them. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Time to head back? Almost. But Chuck… Ray hesitated, choosing his words carefully. If he does challenge you directly, you don't have to engage. No one would think less of you. The look Chuck gave him was neither offended nor amused, simply patient, as if explaining something to a well-meaning but confused child. I've never made decisions based on what others might think of me, he said quietly. That's a path that leads nowhere worth going. Meanwhile, in the arena, Jason had grown increasingly restless. The prolonged waiting between the preliminary matches and the main event had given him too much time to dwell on Chuck's dismissive non-response. Each time the crowd chanted Chuck's name, which happened with frustrating regularity, Jason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This is ridiculous, he muttered to his manager. They're treating him like he's some kind of untouchable god. He's an icon, his manager replied. The voice of reason increasingly strained. People have grown up with Chuck Norris as the definition of a martial artist. Based on what? Movies that are older than half the people here? Internet jokes? Jason's voice rose enough that nearby fans turned to look. When was the last time anyone saw him actually fight? A security guard stationed nearby shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Jason stood abruptly. I need some air. Instead of heading toward the exit, however, he began making his way toward the octagon, ignoring his manager's startled protest. Security personnel exchanged alarmed glances, but were uncertain whether to intervene. Statham was, after all, a celebrity guest with front-row access. The movement immediately caught the attention of the cameras. On the overhead screens, Jason's progress was tracked in real time, his determined stride broadcasting intent even before he reached his destination. The announcer, in the middle of introducing the pioneers being honored, faltered mid-sentence. As he noticed the commotion, the crowd's attention swiveled toward Jason, conversations dying away as anticipation built. Jason reached the edge of the octagon just as the cage door opened for the honorees to enter. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, smoothly intercepting the microphone from the startled announcer. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. I hope you don't mind a slight interruption. Security began moving toward him, but the event director signaled them to wait. The unexpected drama was exactly what the broadcast needed. I've been sitting there, Jason continued, gesturing toward his seat, watching these incredible fighters put everything on the line. Real skill, real courage, real consequences. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some cheering his boldness, others booing the interruption. Jason embraced both responses, turning slowly to address the entire arena. And it got me thinking about something. About what separates actors like me, who play at being tough guys, from the real legends of fighting. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd until they fixed on the tunnel entrance where Chuck would soon appear. About the difference between reputation and reality. The commentators' voices overlapped in urgency. Is he doing what I think he's doing? Dave Cahill asked incredulously. It sure looks like Jason Statham is about to publicly challenge Chuck Norris. Raquel Torres confirmed, her professional tone barely containing her amazement. In the tunnel, Ray Mendoza's phone buzzed with urgent messages. He glanced at the screen, then at Chuck beside him. "Statham's hijacked the mic," he said tensely. "He's in the octagon." Chuck nodded once but didn't break stride, continuing his steady walk toward the arena. Back in the cage, Jason was warming to his theme, playing to the cameras with the skill of a man who had spent decades in front of them. Chuck Norris is a legend, we all know that. His contributions to martial arts are undeniable. He paused, letting the crowd's approving response wash over him before adding, "But legends belong in history books. We're here tonight to witness the present state of fighting, aren't we?" The mood shifted, uncertainty rippling through the stands. Jason sensed it and pressed his advantage. "So I've got a proposition that might make this exhibition even more interesting." His voice dropped, creating intimacy despite the thousands listening. "A special addition to the card. Not scheduled, not rehearsed, not choreographed." A murmur built across the arena as understanding dawned. Phones lifted higher, recording every word. "Chuck Norris versus Jason Statham," he announced, each word deliberate and clear. "Right here. Right now. No stunts. No camera tricks. Just reality." The crowd's reaction was immediate and deafening, a mixture of shock, excitement, and disbelief that crashed like a wave around the octagon. Security personnel moved closer to the cage, awaiting instructions from increasingly panicked event organizers. Jason raised a hand, calling for quiet. "Before anyone says it's unfair because of the age difference, I'll fight with one hand tied behind my back." Literally. He grinned, the expression both challenging and self-deprecating. "Seems fair, right? The legend versus the actor, handicapped to level the playing field." In the officials' area, the event director was frantically consulting with legal advisors. "We can't allow this," he insisted. "The liability alone." "But the ratings," countered the broadcast producer. "This would be the most watched exhibition in history." "It's not happening," the director stated firmly. "Get security to remove him from the cage." Respectfully, but immediately. Before the order could be executed, a hush fell over the arena. All eyes turned toward the tunnel entrance, where Chuck Norris now stood, illuminated by the spotlight that had automatically tracked to his position. The contrast could not have been more stark. Jason, in the center of the octagon, microphone in hand, body language expansive and challenging. Chuck at the edge of the arena, making no move to approach, his stillness somehow more commanding than any gesture could have been. For a long moment, neither man moved. The crowd held its collective breath. Then Chuck began walking forward, his pace unhurried, but purposeful. Security moved to intercept him, but he continued past them as if they weren't there. Not pushing through, not asserting authority, simply moving with such quiet certainty that they instinctively stepped aside. The path to the octagon cleared before him. Fans leaned forward in their seats, phones recording from every angle. Social media platforms crashed briefly under the sudden surge of live streaming attempts. Jason watched Chuck's approach, microphone still gripped in his hand, expression moving between confidence and the first flicker of uncertainty. He had expected refusal, perhaps outrage, not this calm advance. Chuck reached the cage door. The security guard stationed there hesitated, looking toward the official's table for guidance. Finding none, he made his own decision, stepping aside and opening the door without a word. As Chuck entered the octagon, the crowd rose to its feet, chanting his name in unison. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" He moved to the center of the cage, stopping a few feet from Jason. He wore no expression beyond slight attentiveness, as if waiting for a student to complete a thought before offering correction. Jason gathered himself, raising the microphone. "So, Chuck," he said, voice carrying easily through the now silent arena, What do you say to my challenge? 1 round, 1 hand behind my back. For the fans. He extended the microphone toward Chuck, the gesture somewhere between offering and demanding. Chuck regarded the microphone for a moment, then looked directly at Jason. The calmness in his gaze was unnerving in its completeness, not the practiced cool of a celebrity, but the centered stillness of a man who had found his balance decades ago and never lost it. He took the microphone, his movement economical and precise. The arena went completely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, 9,000 people frozen in anticipation. Chuck raised the microphone slowly. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly, the words measured and unhurried. There's a question you haven't asked yourself. Jason, he said. Why do you need this challenge so badly? It wasn't what anyone had expected. Not a yes, not a no, not an insult or a boast. Jason blinked, momentarily thrown off script. I don't need anything. He recovered quickly. I'm offering the fans something authentic. Reality instead of reputation. Chuck nodded slightly, as if considering this. Reality, he repeated. Interesting choice of word from an actor. A ripple of response moved through the crowd, not quite laughter, but the collective intake of breath that acknowledges a point scored. I'm more than an actor, Jason countered, color rising in his face. I've trained with real fighters for years, no camera tricks here. Training is good, Chuck acknowledged. Essential, even. But there's a difference between training to look like you can fight and training because fighting has chosen you. His gaze remained steady, not challenging, but assessing the look of a man who had evaluated thousands of opponents across decades and could read the truth in how they stood, how they breathed, how they carried their intent. So that's a no then? Jason pressed, voice hardening. The legend backs down? Chuck shook his head, the movement almost imperceptible. I don't need to fight you to prove anything, Jason. And you don't need to fight me to learn what you're really looking for. And what's that? Jason's tone was sarcastic now, defensive. Validation, Chuck said simply. But it doesn't come from challenges or cameras or cheering crowds. It comes from within. He extended the microphone back toward Jason, who took it automatically, expression conflicted. Chuck turned to leave the octagon, his message delivered. He had taken 3 steps when Jason's voice rang out behind him, amplified by both microphone and rising emotion. That's it? A fortune cookie wisdom drop? And then walk away? The frustration in his voice was raw, genuine in a way his earlier performance hadn't been. Prove it in the cage, like everyone else has to. Chuck paused, then turned back slowly. Something had shifted in his demeanor, not anger, not even annoyance, but a focused attention that made the hairs on the back of Jason's neck stand up. You want proof? Chuck asked. Voice pitched to carry without the microphone. Put down the mic. Jason hesitated, then tossed the microphone to the side of the cage where it landed with feedback squeal. The crowd went completely still. Even those who had been loudly cheering for Jason moments before sensed the shift in atmosphere. This was no longer entertainment. It was something older, more elemental. In the commentator's booth, Dave and Raquel fell silent, understanding that no narration was needed for what was unfolding. Jason squared his shoulders, his celebrity persona falling away to reveal the fighter he'd worked to become behind the scenes of his action films. He raised his hands in a competent guard position, balance centered, eyes focused. No handicap, he said, voice carrying in the silence. Just you and me, fair and square. Chuck studied him for a moment, then nodded once. He made no move to remove his button-down shirt or change his stance. He simply stood, hands relaxed at his sides, waiting. The stillness stretched between them, taut as a wire. Jason shifted his weight, clearly uncertain how to proceed against an opponent who wasn't even in a fighting stance. "Are we doing this or what?" he finally asked, tension bleeding into his voice. "Whenever you're ready," Chuck replied calmly. The simple response triggered something in Jason. He moved forward suddenly, launching a quick, probing jab professional enough, clearly designed to test Chuck's reflexes. Chuck didn't block. He simply wasn't there when the punch arrived, having shifted his weight fractionally to one side. The movement was so minimal, so efficient, that it seemed Jason had simply missed rather than Chuck having dodged. Jason blinked, momentarily thrown, then followed with a combination jab, cross, hook executed with the precision of someone who had indeed trained seriously with professional fighters. Again, Chuck's response was barely perceptible. Small adjustments in position, subtle shifts in weight, each movement exactly calibrated to the minimum necessary to avoid contact. He didn't counter, didn't strike back. He simply wasn't where the punches were. The crowd began to murmur, understanding they were witnessing something remarkable. This wasn't the flashy evasion of a boxing match or the dramatic dodges of a movie fight. This was economy of motion elevated to art form, the product of decades spent eliminating every unnecessary movement from one's repertoire. Jason's frustration mounted visibly. His next attacks came faster, harder, a front kick, transitioning into a spinning back fist, techniques chosen to cover more area, to make evasion more difficult. Chuck finally moved more than a few inches, pivoting smoothly around the kick and ducking under the back fist in one continuous motion. As Jason's momentum carried him forward, Chuck simply placed a hand on his shoulder, not a strike, not even a push, but a touch that somehow redirected Jason's energy and sent him stumbling 3 steps to regain his balance. The touch contained a message that everyone watching could read. "I could have ended this, but chose not to." Jason turned, breathing harder now, face flushed with a mixture of exertion and embarrassment. "Fight back," he demanded, the words escaping before he could stop them. Chuck's expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes shifted, a decision made. He nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "As you wish." He moved toward Jason, not charging, not rushing, but advancing with the same measured pace he'd maintained since entering the arena. Jason set himself, ready for whatever attack might come. What happened next occurred so quickly that many in the audience would later debate exactly what they'd seen. Chuck closed the distance, made 3 precise movements, and suddenly Jason was on one knee, one arm immobilized in Chuck's grip, the other hand braced against the mat to keep from falling completely. The hold wasn't painful. Jason's expression showed surprise rather than discomfort, but it was utterly controlling. To everyone watching, the message was clear. This could end instantly if Chuck chose. For 3 heartbeats, they remained frozen in that position. Jason kneeling, Chuck standing calmly beside him, holding the younger man's wrist and elbow in a textbook joint lock that any martial arts student would recognize from their first weeks of training. Then Chuck released him and stepped back, creating space between them. Jason rose slowly, rubbing his arm, though there was no injury. His expression had transformed completely, the cocky grin, the challenging sneer, all gone. In their place was something rarely seen on the action star's face: humility. "How did you?" he began, then stopped, realizing the question itself revealed how much he had underestimated the man before him. Chuck regarded him with the same calm he'd maintained throughout, but now there was something else there too. A recognition, perhaps even respect. "It's not about age, Jason," he said quietly. "It's about the journey. You're still fighting to prove something. I passed that stage a long time ago. The words weren't spoken to humiliate or lecture. They were offered as one martial artist to another, a truth earned through decades of discipline. Jason stood still, absorbing the moment. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone watching, he bowed slightly, not theatrically, but with genuine respect. "Thank you for the lesson," he said, voice low enough that only Chuck and those nearest the cage could hear. Chuck acknowledged the bow with a slight nod. "The journey doesn't end, you know. It just changes form." With that, he turned and walked toward the cage door, which opened before him without command. He exited as he had entered, unhurried, undramatic, yet commanding complete attention by his mere presence. Jason remained in the center of the octagon, watching Chuck's departure. For perhaps the first time in his public life, he seemed genuinely speechless. The silence that had gripped the arena during the brief exchange now broke like a wave against rocks. The crowd erupted not in the divided chants of before, but in unified appreciation for what they had witnessed. This hadn't been a fight. It had been a demonstration of something far more profound. In the commentator's booth, Raquel Torres shook her head in amazement. "In 30 years of covering combat sports," she said into her microphone, "I've never seen anything quite like that." Dave Cahill nodded in agreement. Chuck Norris just schooled one of Hollywood's toughest action stars without throwing a single punch. That wasn't about fighting, that was about mastery. As security personnel moved to escort Jason from the cage, the cameras caught one final moment. Jason looking toward the tunnel where Chuck had disappeared, his expression thoughtful, almost introspective, as if re-evaluating everything he had assumed about strength, about fighting, about himself. The challenge had escalated exactly as everyone had anticipated. The resolution, however, had transcended everyone's expectations. The main event was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. But the arena buzzed with the aftershocks of what had just transpired between Chuck Norris and Jason Statham. Production assistants scurried through the back corridors, frantically adjusting the program to accommodate the unexpected interlude. Social media platforms exploded with clips from dozens of angles, each capturing fragments of the brief but profound exchange. The touch was already trending worldwide, referring to that single, deliberate moment when Chuck had placed his hand on Jason's shoulder, redirecting him without force. In the VIP section, professional fighters debated what they had witnessed in hushed, reverent tones. "Did you see how little he moved?" Mateo Rodriguez gestured with his hands, trying to capture the economy of Chuck's movements. "That's not just skill. That's something beyond technique. It's efficiency," Diego Reyes replied, his eyes still fixed on the empty octagon. "When you've practiced something for 50 years, you learn to eliminate everything unnecessary." Nearby, a veteran coach who had remained silent throughout the exchange finally spoke up. "What you boys just saw wasn't fighting, it was the difference between knowledge and wisdom." In the private lounge backstage, Chuck sat calmly drinking water, showing no signs of exertion or excitement. Ray Mendoza paced the room, phone constantly buzzing with notifications. "The network executives are losing their minds," Ray said, scrolling through messages. "Ratings just spiked higher than any UFC event in history. They want to know if you'll do an interview after the main event." Chuck shook his head slightly. "Not necessary." The moment spoke for itself. "But Chuck, this is huge. You just showed up one of Hollywood's biggest action stars without breaking a sweat. People want to hear your take." If they were watching carefully, they already heard it. Chuck set his water bottle down. "How's Jason doing?" The question caught Ray off guard. "Jason? I assume he's licking his wounds somewhere. Why do you care?" Chuck's expression softened slightly. Because that was a difficult moment for him. Public humility always is. but it's also a valuable one if he chooses to learn from it. Meanwhile, in his private dressing room, Jason Statham sat alone, having dismissed his entourage with a terse request for privacy. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, seeing himself with newly critical eyes. The door opened after a soft knock, and his manager entered cautiously. "You okay? The media's blowing up out there. We should probably craft a response." "Not now." Jason cut him off. Voice quiet, but firm. "No. But your image." "My image," Jason repeated, a humorless smile crossing his face. "That's exactly what just got dismantled out there, isn't it?" His manager hesitated, uncertain how to navigate this unfamiliar territory. Jason Statham, humbled, was not something in his experience. "Look, we can spin this," he offered. "Say it was all planned, part of the entertainment. Or highlight that you had the courage to challenge a legend, focus on the respect angle." Jason turned from the mirror, his expression unusually serious. "Is that what you think just happened out there? Something to spin?" "I'm just trying to protect your brand." "My brand?" Jason nodded slowly. "The tough guy who backs down from nothing. The action hero who can handle himself in any situation." He gestured toward the door, toward the arena beyond. "He didn't even have to try, Pete. Do you understand that? All these years I've been training, building myself up, and he handled me like I was a beginner." His manager shifted uncomfortably. "He's Chuck Norris. That's his whole thing." "No." Jason shook his head firmly. "That's what I thought too. That it was just a reputation, a meme, a cultivated image." He stood up, pacing the small room. "But out there, I felt something I haven't felt since my first day in a dojo 20 years ago. Complete and total control, not through force, but through—" he struggled for the right word. "Through presence." A knock at the door interrupted them. A production assistant peeked in nervously. "Mr. Statham? The director was wondering if you'll be returning to your seat for the main event. It's starting in 10 minutes. Jason paused, considering. Part of him wanted to leave to escape the arena and the thousands who had witnessed his humbling. But something deeper, something that had been awakened by those brief moments in the cage, pushed against that impulse. "Yes," he decided. "I'll be there." The assistant nodded and departed. His manager gave him a questioning look. "Are you sure? No one would blame you for ducking out after that." "That's exactly why I need to stay," Jason replied, straightening his jacket. "Running away would just prove I didn't learn anything." As Jason made his way back to the arena floor, he was acutely aware of the eyes following him, the phones lifting to capture his return. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some applauded his willingness to show his face, others whispered behind their hands. He kept his gaze forward, expression composed. He reached his seat just as the lights dimmed for the main event introduction. Across the arena, Chuck had taken his position as special guest referee, standing quietly at the edge of the octagon. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our main event of the evening." The crowd roared in response, temporarily distracted from the earlier drama. But as the first fighter made his entrance, complete with blaring music and elaborate light show, Jason found his attention drawn not to the spectacle, but to Chuck's stillness amid the chaos. While everyone else reacted to the sensory assault, cheering, moving, engaging with the energy, Chuck remained centered, his focus internal rather than external. It was a contrast Jason had never fully appreciated before. The difference between being moved by one's environment and choosing one's relationship to it. The fighters entered the cage, went through their final preparations, and took their positions. Chuck moved to the center, gathered them for final instructions, then stepped back with a simple, "Fight clean. Begin." The bell rang, and the main event was underway. What followed was a technical masterpiece, both fighters displaying years of training and strategy, trading positions of advantage, testing each other's defenses. But Jason found himself watching not just the fighters but the referee, observing how Chuck moved with them, always in perfect position, without ever intruding on their exchange. Midway through the second round, a pivotal moment occurred. One fighter caught the other with a stunning combination, sending him staggering back against the cage. The crowd surged to its feet, sensing a potential finish. The dominant fighter rushed forward, launching a flying knee that appeared certain to end the contest. In that split second, Chuck's position shifted slightly, not interfering, but ready. The knee missed by centimeters, allowing the defending fighter to clinch and recover. The match continued, balance restored. But Jason had seen something critical. Chuck had known exactly what would happen before it did. His slight adjustment in position hadn't been reactive, it had been preemptive, based on a reading of intention and possibility that went beyond mere observation. The realization sent Jason's mind back to their encounter. Had Chuck known every move Jason would make before he made it? Had the entire exchange been like a chess master playing against a novice, the outcome determined before the first piece moved? The fight continued into the third round, both competitors showing signs of fatigue but continuing to display remarkable skill. Jason found himself appreciating the technical aspects in a way he never had before, seeing beyond the dramatic moments to the fundamentals that made them possible. Between rounds, his gaze met Chuck's across the distance. No words were exchanged, no gestures made. But something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps. Jason nodded slightly, and Chuck acknowledged with the barest inclination of his head. In that moment, something shifted in Jason's understanding. The humiliation he had felt began to transform into something else, not quite gratitude, not yet, but a recognition that what had happened in the cage had been necessary. A correction to a course he hadn't known was off. The main event concluded with a decision victory after 5 grueling rounds. As the winner's hand was raised, the crowd exploded in applause, appreciative of the heart and skill displayed by both competitors. Chuck completed his official duties, then made his way toward the exit tunnel, his portion of the evening complete. As he passed near Jason's seat, he paused briefly. "Impressive fight," Jason offered, the words simple but genuine. "They both showed true spirit." Chuck agreed. Then, after a moment's consideration, "The hotel has a private training room. 6 a.m. tomorrow, if you're interested." Before Jason could respond, Chuck continued on his way, disappearing into the tunnel that led backstage. Jason sat back in his seat, processing the invitation. His manager leaned over. "What was that about?" "I think," Jason said slowly, "it was about continuing the lesson." The arena began to empty, fans filing out in excited clusters, discussing both the main event and the unexpected confrontation that had preceded it. Jason remained in his seat, uncharacteristically reflective. A young fighter, Diego Reyes, approached hesitantly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mr. Statham? I just wanted to say, what you did tonight took courage." Jason looked up, surprised. "Getting schooled in front of thousands? Not sure courage is the word." Diego shook his head. "I meant accepting it the way you did. Not making excuses, not storming off. That's something a lot of fighters never learn." The observation landed with unexpected weight. Jason studied the young man, seeing genuine respect in his eyes. "Thanks," he said simply. "I appreciate that." As Diego moved away, Jason realized something surprising. The humbling he had experienced hadn't diminished him in everyone's eyes. For some, perhaps those who understood fighting on a deeper level, It had revealed something more valuable than the image he had cultivated. He checked his watch. It was just past midnight. 6 a.m. would come quickly. The decision required only a moment's consideration. He would be there. The hotel's private training room was sparse but well-equipped, heavy bags in one corner, mats covering the floor, mirrors lining a wall. At 5:45 a.m., Jason Statham entered wearing simple black training gear. He had expected to arrive first, to prepare mentally. Chuck Norris was already there, seated in meditation at the center of the mat. He wore a traditional gi with a black belt, so worn it had faded to dark gray. His eyes remained closed, breathing steady and controlled. Jason hesitated at the threshold, uncertain of protocol. Before he could decide, Chuck spoke without opening his eyes. "You're early." Chuck spoke. "Good." Jason placed his gym bag down and approached, stopping at the edge of the mat. "I wasn't sure if this was going to be training or something else." "Does it matter?" Chuck opened his eyes, regarding Jason with calm focus. Jason considered this seriously. "I guess not. I'm here to learn, whatever form that takes." Chuck nodded and rose to his feet in a single smooth motion that belied his age. No bracing with hands, no adjusting for balance, just controlled transition from seated to standing. "Take off your shoes and join me," he instructed. Jason complied, placing his cross-trainers neatly at the edge before stepping onto the padded surface. "What did you feel last night?" Chuck asked directly. "Honestly?" Jason took a breath. "Confusion at first. Then frustration. Then realization. Maybe." "Realization of what?" "That I've been confusing appearance with substance." Jason gestured to himself. "I've spent years building this body, learning techniques, playing the tough guy. But when it actually mattered, none of it was real." Chuck shook his head slightly. "That's not quite right. Your training is real. Your dedication is real. Your techniques have substance. What you lacked wasn't reality, it was context." He moved a few steps to the side, indicating for Jason to mirror him. As they began circling slowly, Chuck continued. "You've trained to fight without understanding why we fight. You've developed power without wisdom to direct it. You've cultivated an image of strength without exploring what strength truly is." "And what is true strength then?" Jason asked. Instead of answering, Chuck stopped moving. "Attack me. Full speed. Full intention," Chuck clarified. "Don't hold back." Jason centered his weight and launched a clean, professional combination jab, cross, hook, exactly as trained. His technique was impeccable, the strikes fast and committed. Chuck parried the first punch, slipped the second, and redirected the third with minimal movement. The economy of his motion was even more apparent in the quiet training room than in the arena. "Again," he instructed, "different angle." This pattern continued for several minutes, Jason attacking with increasingly complex combinations, Chuck responding with calm precision. It wasn't a contest but a demonstration, a living illustration of the difference between technique and mastery. Finally, Chuck raised a hand to pause. Jason stopped immediately, breathing hard while Chuck showed no signs of exertion. "What did you notice?" Chuck asked. "You're never surprised," Jason replied. "Even when I change the attack pattern, you're already there." Chuck nodded. "Because I'm not reacting to what you do, I'm responding to what you intend. Before your body moves, your intention moves." "I read that, not the physical technique." He gestured for Jason to sit. Once both were seated facing each other, Chuck continued. "This is what I meant by context. Fighting isn't about the body in motion, it's about the mind directing that motion. True martial arts begins with mastering yourself, not others. Is that even possible? Jason asked, genuine curiosity replacing defensiveness. To completely master yourself? Chuck smiled slightly, the first real expression Jason had seen from him. It's not a destination you reach. It's a path you walk every day. He gestured around them. I still train daily. I still meditate. I still find aspects of myself that need refinement. Jason absorbed this, seeing the humility inherent in the statement. Here was Chuck Norris, a legend by any measure, acknowledging his own ongoing journey. Last night, Jason said carefully, when you put me in that hold, you could have embarrassed me completely, made it much worse. What would that have accomplished? Chuck asked simply. Proven your point. Shown everyone how easily you could take me down. That wasn't the point that needed proving. The lesson wasn't about my abilities, it was about your perception. He rose again, indicating for Jason to do the same. Now, he said, I want you to defend. Don't attack, just prevent me from touching you. Jason set himself in a defensive stance, confident in his defensive training. What followed was a masterclass in the difference between fighting and controlling. Chuck moved toward him, not rushing, not using speed or power, but advancing with such precise intention that Jason found himself constantly adjusting, constantly retreating. Each time he thought he had established a solid defense, Chuck would find the gap in his awareness. Within 30 seconds, Chuck had touched him lightly, 7 times, shoulder, chest, back, knee, elbow, temple, and center of the forehead. None were strikes, they were demonstrations of access. Jason stood still, processing what had happened. It hadn't felt like losing a fight. It had felt like being read like an open book. How? He asked finally. How do you see everything so clearly? Because I'm not looking with my eyes alone, Chuck answered. I'm feeling with my whole being. When you quiet your internal dialogue, the voice always judging, always narrating, you create space to truly perceive. He moved to the center of the mat, gesturing for Jason to join him. Close your eyes, he instructed. Jason complied, though it went against every fighting instinct. Now, feel my presence. Don't think about where I might be. Feel where I am. Jason concentrated, trying to sense Chuck's position without sight. He heard subtle sounds, the whisper of fabric, the faint pressure of feet on the mat, but struggled to form a coherent picture. You're thinking too much, Chuck observed. Stop trying to calculate and start trying to sense. Jason took a deep breath, attempting to quiet his mind. He became aware of a subtle shift in the air, a barely perceptible change in energy around him. You're to my left, he said hesitantly. Yes. Now track me as I move. For several minutes, they engaged in this unusual exercise, Jason with eyes closed, attempting to follow Chuck's movements, using only his other senses. Gradually, he began to develop a rudimentary awareness. When Chuck finally told him to open his eyes, Jason was surprised to find him standing exactly where he had sensed 3 paces away, slightly to the right. That's the beginning, Chuck said. The very first step on a much longer path. It's not about fighting at all, is it? Jason realized. Not really. Fighting is just the vehicle, Chuck confirmed. The destination is self-knowledge. The techniques, the physical conditioning, their means, not ends. He walked to the edge of the mat and wiped his face with a towel. A gesture so normal, so human, that it struck Jason forcefully. This legend was also just a man who had dedicated his life to a particular path. The most important fight you'll ever have is against your own ego. That's what I saw in you last night, not a lack of skill or courage, but a battle with ego that you were losing. The observation hit with the force of revelation. Jason had never considered his confidence as something separate from himself, an identity constructed rather than his essential nature. "So, what now?" he asked. Chuck regarded him thoughtfully. "That depends on what you want. If it's just to save face after last night, I'd suggest a humble social media post. But if it's something deeper, I want what you showed me," Jason said after genuine consideration. "Not the techniques, the clarity, the certainty." Chuck nodded, satisfied. "Then this is just the beginning. Real training, the kind that transforms rather than just develops, takes time and commitment." He extended his hand. "Are you willing to put in that time?" Jason looked at the offered hand, weathered by decades yet still powerful in its stillness. He grasped it firmly. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." The handshake sealed something more significant than either articulated. It was an acknowledgement of transition from confrontation to mentorship, from arrogance to humility, from image to substance. As they concluded, Chuck offered one final observation. "The strongest fighters I've known were never the ones who needed to prove themselves. They were the ones who had nothing to prove because they had already confronted their greatest opponent themselves." Jason gathered his things, the words settling deep within him. As he reached the door, he turned back. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Chuck smiled slightly. 6 a.m. Don't be late." 3 months later, the MGM Grand Garden Arena hosted another fight night. Jason Statham arrived without fanfare, wearing a simple dark jacket over a black t-shirt more subdued than his usual public appearance attire. "Mr. Statham," called a reporter who spotted him, "care to comment on the rumors about your training with Chuck Norris?" Jason paused, considering. 3 months ago, he would have used the moment to craft a narrative that enhanced his image. Now, he simply smiled. "Some things are better experienced than discussed," he said, before continuing to his seat. Social media had been abuzz with occasional glimpses of Jason and Chuck, a photo taken by hotel staff showing them in the private training room, a brief video clip of them running together along the Vegas Strip at dawn. But neither man had made any public statement about their ongoing connection. In the time since that first morning session, Jason had maintained a disciplined routine. 6 days a week, he arrived at the training room by 5:45 a.m. Chuck was always there before him, always prepared, always focused. Their work together had evolved from physical techniques to include meditation, breathing practices, philosophical discussions, and the study of classical martial arts texts. For someone accustomed to the spotlight, the privacy of this journey had been its own challenge. Jason had built a career on being seen, on transforming private effort into public persona. Learning to value the work for its own sake represented a profound shift in his understanding of worth and purpose. As he settled into his seat, Jason noticed Chuck entering from the opposite side. Their eyes met across the distance. Jason inclined his head slightly. Chuck returned the gesture. No words needed to be exchanged. The connection between them had developed its own language of mutual recognition. Between bouts, Diego Reyes approached the young fighter who had spoken to Jason after the infamous confrontation. He had just won his match decisively, establishing himself as a serious contender. "Mr. Statham," Diego greeted him. "Good to see you again." Jason stood to shake his hand. "Congratulations on the win. Clean performance." "Thank you." Diego hesitated. "I've been hearing things about your training, that you've been working with Chuck regularly." Jason nodded without elaboration. "I was wondering." Do you think he might consider taking on another student? Even just occasionally? The request reflected an understanding that many in the fighting community now shared, that what passed between Chuck and Jason went beyond the physical training available from conventional coaches. That's not for me to say, Jason replied honestly. But I can tell him you asked. Diego nodded appreciatively. I'd be grateful. Whatever you've been learning from him, it shows. Shows? How so? It's in how you carry yourself, Diego explained. Before, you had presence because you demanded attention. Now, you have presence because you don't need it. He shrugged slightly. Fighters notice these things. The observation struck Jason with unexpected force. He had been so focused on the internal journey that he hadn't fully considered how it might manifest externally. After the event concluded, Jason made his way toward the exit. Near the main doors, he encountered Chuck, who had paused to speak with several veteran fighters. Walk with me, Chuck suggested simply. They moved outside into the cool desert evening. For several minutes, they walked in companionable silence, neither feeling the need to fill the space with unnecessary words. Finally, Chuck spoke. Diego Reyes. He asked about training. Jason nodded, unsurprised that Chuck had noticed their interaction. He's serious about it. Not looking for publicity, he genuinely wants to learn. Chuck considered this. Send him tomorrow. 5:30. They continued walking, passing the elaborate fountains of the Vegas Strip that shot illuminated water into the night sky. You know, Jason said after a while, 3 months ago, I thought I understood fighting. Thought I understood strength. He shook his head. I didn't know anything. You knew techniques, Chuck corrected gently. But techniques without philosophy are just organized violence. Jason nodded. The director of my next film called yesterday. Wanted to know if I'd incorporate some of what I've been learning into the fight sequences, make them more authentic. And what did you tell him? That some things aren't meant for show. Jason glanced at his mentor. That felt right. But, is it selfish to keep knowledge private? Chuck smiled slightly. It's not about keeping knowledge private. It's about respecting its context. What we practice isn't for entertainment, it's for development. Different purpose, different path. They reached a quiet spot away from the main strip. Chuck stopped, turning to face Jason directly. You've changed, he observed, not a question or compliment, simply recognition of fact. Because of your teaching, Jason acknowledged. Chuck shook his head. No. Because of your learning. I only opened the door. You chose to walk through it. There's something I've been wanting to ask, Jason said, his tone shifting. That night in the cage, you could have embarrassed me completely. Made me look foolish in front of millions. Why didn't you? Chuck considered the question with thoughtful attention. Humiliation doesn't teach, he said finally. It only creates resistance. True learning requires an open mind, and humiliation closes the mind. He looked directly at Jason. Besides, fighting isn't about defeating others. It's about mastering yourself. But I challenged you publicly, Jason pressed. Disrespected your legacy. And how would responding with public humiliation have honored that legacy? Chuck countered. Everything I've built centers on respect for oneself, for others, for the art. Breaking that principle to protect my ego would have undermined everything I stand for. They approached the hotel. Before entering, Chuck paused. Tomorrow is the last day, he said. Jason looked at him in surprise. Of training? Of this phase, Chuck clarified. You've learned what I can teach you for now. The rest of the journey is yours to continue. "I don't feel ready," Jason admitted. "No student ever does," Chuck replied with understanding. "But readiness isn't about feeling prepared for every challenge. It's about developing the capacity to meet challenges as they come." He placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, the same light touch that had redirected him in the cage months ago, but now conveying support rather than control. "The path doesn't end," Chuck assured him. "It just continues under your own direction." Inside the hotel lobby, they encountered a group of fans. Without discussion, both men stopped, taking time to acknowledge each person with genuine attention rather than celebrity obligation. A final fan approached a middle-aged man with his teenage son. "Mr. Norris, Mr. Statham," the father began. "My son and I have been following your story since that night at the arena. It's meant a lot to us watching how something that started as a challenge turned into, well, something else." The son nodded eagerly. "I started training in martial arts because of it. Not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind it." Chuck and Jason exchanged a glance, sharing a moment of recognition. What had begun as a public confrontation had rippled outward, affecting lives they would never know. "The technique is just the beginning," Chuck told the young man. "The real practice happens in here." He touched his heart briefly. "And up here," Jason added, tapping his temple. Later that evening, Jason received a message from his agent. "TMZ has photos of you and Chuck at the fights tonight. They're running a story speculating about your secret training regime. Want me to issue a statement?" 3 months ago, his immediate reaction would have been to control the narrative. Now, he simply typed, "No statement needed. Let it be." He set the phone aside and began his evening meditation, the practice Chuck had taught him for quieting the mind before sleep. As he closed his eyes and focused on his breath, he felt a deep sense of alignment that no public acclaim had ever provided. The lesson of respect had come full circle. What had begun with disrespect born of ignorance had evolved into self-respect born of knowledge. He had learned that true strength wasn't about dominance or display. It was about integration, mind and body, action and intention, past and present. For in the end, that was the essence of the lesson. Not that Chuck Norris could defeat Jason Statham in a fight that had never been in question, but that true victory comes not from conquering others, but from conquering oneself. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.